Tonight, we're diving into something weird, a little wild, and surprisingly ancient. What if I told you the Egyptians? Yeah, the pyramid building, cat-worshipping legends, spent a good chunk of their golden age high as the Nile in flood season. While we're out here microdosing kombucha and debating oat milk foam, they were sipping blue lotus tea, inhaling sacred herbs, and literally writing spiritual trip reports on temple walls. And that's just the opening act. Because ancient Egypt was way trippier, deeper, and more spiritually experimental than any Hollywood blockbuster ever dared to show. So buckle up, or wrap yourself in linen, whatever fits the vibe. We're about to uncover 10 mind-bending Egyptian facts that'll leave you both enlightened and side-eyeing every museum tour guide you've ever trusted. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Like and subscribe if you're into ancient truths wrapped in sarcasm and storytelling. Now dim the lights. Cue the incense. Let's get weird. They got high, spiritually and otherwise, expanded. Let's set the scene. Golden sand, blinding sun, a temple in the distance. A high priest walks in, robe flowing, eyes half closed, not because he's tired, but because he just sipped a cup of blue lotus wine and is now astral projecting into the afterlife on a full sensory vacation. Yes, the ancient Egyptians got high, like spiritually, ceremonially, and maybe for the vibes. The blue lotus flower, Nymphea cerulea, wasn't just a symbol of rebirth and enlightenment. It was their go-to tool for mental elevation. Think of it as the ancient world's version of that friend who's way too into essential oils, except this one actually worked. It was often soaked in wine or steeped into tea, creating a euphoric, dreamlike state. The effects: mild hallucinations, feelings of ecstasy, and a sense of divine connection. And the best part? It was totally legal, because back then, your dealer was your priest. But this wasn't some underground rave behind the pyramids, though I'd watch that movie. No, this was sacred. In temple rituals, blue lotus helped priests commune with deities. In funerary rites, it was a bridge between the living and the dead. In parties, yes, they partied. It was used to enhance pleasure and loosen the royal robes, if you know what I mean. Even Tutankhamun's tomb had dried blue lotus flowers tucked next to him, like he knew the afterlife might get boring and packed a spiritual snack. And it wasn't just the lotus. There's evidence of other psychoactive herbs in ancient medical texts, like Mandrake and henbane, which were also used to relieve pain, induce visions, and sometimes just make the screaming stop. Modern scientists have studied remnants of ancient cups and jars and found chemical traces consistent with drug compounds. So no, this isn't some History Channel alien theory. It's actual residue, literal ancient high tea. And remember, they did all this with zero TikTok recipes or influencer guides. Just trial, error, and a willingness to see what the gods had to say when your eyeballs started buzzing. So next time you're feeling deep because you lit sage and played lo-fi beats, just remember, the Egyptians were out here mixing botanicals, connecting with Horus, and writing their trip reports in hieroglyphs before you were even born. But of course, no good trip is complete without a soundtrack. And if you thought ancient Egyptian music was all just drum beats and flutes, get ready to be serenaded by healing frequencies and soul science. Ancient Egyptians used music as medicine. Picture this. You're in ancient Thebes. The air smells like frankincense, Your boss just yelled at you for carving the wrong scarab, and your back aches like you spent the last 12 hours hauling limestone up a pyramid. You don't have ibuprofen. There's no massage therapist. And nobody's prescribing you self-care. But what you do have is a temple harpist. That's right. Ancient Egyptians used music the way we use Advil. Except their playlist didn't come from Spotify. It came from the gods. Let's break it down. The OG healing playlist. In ancient Egypt, music wasn't entertainment. It was a therapeutic force, a legit prescription for physical, emotional, and even spiritual healing. We're talking chants that realigned your soul frequency, instruments tuned to invoke specific deities, and rhythms thought to balance the ka and ba, your life force and your soul. It was part meditation, part science, and part sonic sorcery. Temples had entire sound chambers, yes, acoustic architecture built to echo sacred vibrations, where priests would perform tonal healing rituals using harps, lutes, flutes, Sistra, metal rattles linked to goddess Hathor. Each instrument had its own spiritual prescription. If you were anxious, play the sistrum. It rattled in a frequency said to ward off evil. Got insomnia? A slow harp progression could lull your nervous system into sleep mode. No joke. They literally believed music could heal the organs. Your heart out of balance? That's a rhythm problem. Liver issues? We need more bass. Medicine for the mind. But here's where it gets even more wild. Ancient texts describe music therapy for grief, depression, nightmares, and even possession by evil spirits, like the demonic equivalent of having a bad week. This wasn't just spiritual fluff. Modern research has found that certain ancient Egyptian scales share frequencies with what we now call binaural beats, sound patterns known to affect brainwave activity. Coincidence? Or did the Egyptians figure out neuroacoustics 4,000 years before TED Talks? The Hathor connection. Hathor, the goddess of love, joy, and music, was basically the divine DJ of ancient Egypt. Worship of her wasn't quiet. It was loud. Temples of Hathor often held ritual concerts, meant to invoke ecstasy and euphoria. Imagine a wellness retreat, but with sacred drums, hypnotic chants, and people genuinely believing that sound waves could reboot your soul like a cosmic hard drive. Ahead of their time. Today we're all about healing frequencies, sound baths, and vibe therapy. We sip mushroom tea and call it ancient wisdom. But the Egyptians were already bathing in the vibe, dressed in linen, rattling bronze instruments under the moon, and tuning the human body like a living symphony. And let's be honest, how many of us have blasted sad music after a breakup and felt a little more human? They weren't primitive. They were plugged in to something we're just starting to rediscover. But while some were tuning their bodies like flutes, others were busy rewriting the rules of surgery with tools that would shock even a modern doctor. Get ready, because Egypt's ancient surgeons weren't just ahead of their time. They were cutting edge, literally. They performed surgeries without Google or anesthesia. Let's get one thing straight. Ancient Egypt wasn't just out here building pyramids, getting spiritually high on Blue Lotus, and vibing to harp frequencies. They were also performing surgeries, real ones, with tools, on people who lived to tell the tale. Yes, before X-rays, before germ theory, before even Band-Aids, these desert-dwelling geniuses were cracking open abscesses, stitching wounds, and even drilling holes into skulls. For real. The original ER. Let's say you're an average farmer in 2600 BCE. You trip over a loose limestone block, bust your knee open, and you're bleeding like a sacrificial goat. What happens next? Do you die in the sand like an extra in a biblical movie? Nope. You're carried, probably moaning, into the hands of a Swendilobu, aka the ancient Egyptian word for doctor. Which, fun fact, was also used to describe priest-physicians, because healing was both science and sacred art. And these weren't just vibe-based guessers. They were trained, skilled. They had medical manuals, real ones, with instructions, case studies, symptoms, prognoses, and even step-by-step guides on how to handle everything from broken bones to bladder infections. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, a medical marvel. Let's talk about one of the oldest medical textbooks in the world, the Edwin Smith Papyrus. This bad boy dates back to around 1600 BCE, but experts believe it's a copy of a much older text, possibly 1,000 years older. Inside, 48 detailed case studies that sound like the Gray's Anatomy of Ancient Trauma Surgery. Example entries. If you examine a man with a gaping wound in his head, exposing the skull bone, and he is conscious. Yep, that's neurosurgery level diagnosis. You should bind the wound with fresh meat on the first day and treat with honey thereafter. Honey wasn't just delicious, it was antibacterial. They knew. This wasn't folklore. This was early clinical reasoning. And they even had prognostic labels. A condition I can treat. A condition I will try to treat. A condition not to be treated. Translation: this one's toast. Surgical tools of the Pharaohs. Now here's where it gets juicy. Archaeologists have found real surgical instruments buried with Egyptian doctors. Scalpels, forceps, tweezers, bone saws, hooks for removing foreign objects, or, let's be honest, curses. And they were made of bronze and obsidian, both of which were sharp enough to make a modern ER doc sweat. Obsidian blades today are still used in some microsurgeries because they're that precise. They even had antiseptics, using things like honey, resins, and copper salts to reduce infections. So while medieval Europe was still shouting "demon" at a guy with a headache, ancient Egyptians were draining abscesses and stitching tendons like it was no big deal. Anesthesia. Who needs it? Now let's address the very large, very painful elephant in the room. No anesthesia. That's right. Surgery back then was raw. You either got knocked out with Mandrake, alcohol, or a blow to the head. Or you just gritted your teeth and took like a pharaoh. Pain was part of the package. But for Egyptians, survival was the flex. And considering the limitations, their success rate was shockingly high. They even had dental surgeries, including early forms of bridges and tooth drilling. Though, yeah, no laughing gas, just a lot of grimacing. They didn't just survive, they innovated. Ancient Egyptian doctors were so respected, even foreign kings requested their services. There are diplomatic letters asking pharaohs to send physicians to treat royal families in Babylon and Syria. They were basically the traveling celebrity surgeons of the Bronze Age. Paging Dr. Imhotep to Isle, Mesopotamia. And guess what? Hippocrates, the so-called father of modern medicine, came 1,000 years after the Egyptians. So really, Hippocrates walked so Imhotep could run, or something like that. They cut, they stitched, they cleaned. They made diagnoses. They kept case files. And they did it all without electricity, latex gloves, or even a coffee break. So the next time you complain about waiting 30 minutes to see your doctor, just remember, ancient Egyptians were doing brain surgery by candlelight with a bronze knife and calling it Tuesday. But healing the body is one thing. What about bending the stars to your will? Because while some were performing surgery, others were mapping the heavens and predicting fate with precision that still baffles modern scientists. Astronomy, calendars, and how the Egyptians may have been the original cosmic influencers. Ancient Egyptians didn't just worship the stars, they charted them. All right, let's set the scene. It's midnight on the Nile. You're lying on a flat rooftop, the stars above you shimmering like flecks of gold dust. There's no city smog, no light pollution, just the Milky Way doing its thing. And somewhere nearby, a scribe is staring at the sky, jotting something down on papyrus. That's not a poet. That's not a dreamer. That is a scientist. Because the ancient Egyptians weren't just stargazers. They were astronomers with a purpose. Stargazing, tri-state-level star management, while most civilizations were still trying to figure out where the sun went at night. Egypt had already figured out how to track the heliacal rising of Sirius, aka the dog star, align temples and pyramids with celestial bodies, calculate calendars, predict floods, and schedule religious rituals down to the cosmic minute. In short, they didn't just look at the stars, they ran their entire society by them. Enter the solar calendar, before the Romans made it trendy. Let's talk about the Sirius system, the MVP of ancient Egyptian timekeeping. Every year, the first appearance of Sirius in the dawn sky, called the heliacal rising, signaled something massive. The flooding of the Nile, aka the lifeblood of Egypt's agriculture, economy, and survival. They noticed this pattern, and boom, calendar mode activated. They divided the year into 12 months, 30 days each, plus 5 epigomenal days dedicated to celebrating gods and cosmic order. That's 365 days. Sound familiar? The Roman calendar. Late to the party. The Mayans. They were great, but Egypt was already on season 800 of Star Trek Afterlife Edition. Temples aligned to the cosmos. Still think they were just into pyramids and cats? Then, major temples, like Karnak, were built with astronomical precision. The axis of Karnak's Great Temple, perfectly aligned with the winter solstice sunrise. Some pyramid shafts even line up with Orion's belt, associated with the god Osiris, the North Star, or specific constellations that held spiritual meaning. So while modern architects struggle with foundation permits, these guys were out here laser-pointing limestone based on the stars. And they did it all using a Merkhet, like a proto-sundial with string and plumb lines, a Bay and Imi unit, hour watcher, which sounds cooler in Egyptian but basically means sky clock guy. Astrological scientists or scientific astrologers? Here's where it gets juicy. They believed the gods moved through the sky, riding solar boats across the heavens. But that didn't mean superstition ruled the day. They knew celestial movements were predictable. They logged data. They built models. They could predict eclipses, map constellations, and even determine the length of a year more accurately than some later Western civilizations. The Greek philosopher Herodotus even wrote, They are the most learned men I have ever met, especially in the stars. That's like Einstein name-dropping Tesla. Massive respect. Star charts for the afterlife? They weren't just into the stars for agriculture and glory. They believed the afterlife itself had a map. Tombs of pharaohs like Seti I and Ramesses VI feature detailed star charts and celestial diagrams designed to guide the soul through the underworld. Think Google Maps for the dead. These weren't doodles. They were full-blown astronomical blueprints, complete with star clocks, constellation maps, instructions for navigating the hours of the night. Each hour of darkness was ruled by a different goddess or deity. If your soul didn't stay on course, you might end up stuck in a cosmic dead end, or worse, eaten by a serpent god with too many teeth, 4,000 years ahead of their time. NASA scientists today still reference Sirius and Orion's belt when calibrating long-range data models. Some Egyptologists believe the Giza pyramids align with Orion not by chance, but by intention. Translation: the Egyptians were doing deep space math using string, sand, and vibes. So next time someone says ancient people weren't that smart, remind them, Egypt was tracking Sirius while the rest of the world was still figuring out how to not eat poison berries. The stars weren't just beautiful to the Egyptians. They were sacred, scientific, and strategic. In the cosmic game of life, Egypt wasn't just playing, they were winning. And they didn't need a telescope to do it. But while the stars told them when to plant and when to praise, they also used sacred geometry to lock secrets into stone. Get ready. Because in Fact 5, we're diving into architectural codes, mystical math, and pyramid puzzles that modern engineers still scratch their heads over. Ancient Egyptian architecture was laced with sacred geometry, and it's freaky accurate. Let's talk pyramids. Not just big triangle-shaped buildings in the desert. We're talking precision-engineered, mathematically encoded stone monuments that were basically USB drives for divine knowledge. And they didn't even have calculators. No laser levels. No blueprints. Just string, shadow, sand, and a freakish understanding of geometry. Let's crack this open. A pyramid scheme that actually worked. First, forget everything you think you know about the pyramids. These weren't just tombs. They were machines for immortality wrapped in math, encoded with cosmic messages, and aligned to the universe so precisely, it makes modern engineers feel like they brought crayons to a physics exam. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's aligned within 0.067 degrees of true north. That's more accurate than most modern buildings. Built with 2.3 million blocks, weighing between 2 to 80 tons each. And somehow stacked with no mortar, but still holding strong after 4,500 years. Coincidence? Not even close. Pi, Phi, and WTF. Here's where things get goosebump-worthy. The Great Pyramid encodes both pi, and the golden ratio phi, west of phi, in its proportions. Yep, 3.14 and 1.618, those mathematical constants you learned in school and promptly forgot, were physically built into the pyramid's geometry. Let me break it down. If you take the perimeter of the base and divide it by the height x2, you get a number extremely close to pi. And the slope angle of the sides? That's phi, aka the golden ratio. The same ratio found in nature, from seashells to galaxies. So, You're telling me that a civilization from 2600 BCE didn't just move mountains, but coded advanced irrational numbers into their buildings without ever writing them down in decimal form? Yes, that's exactly what we're saying. Geometry is spiritual technology. To the Egyptians, geometry wasn't math, it was magic. They believed shapes held divine energy, and sacred structures had to reflect the harmonic balance of the cosmos. That's why temples weren't built randomly. They were laid out like spiritual circuit boards, following principles of symmetry, golden proportions, cardinal directions, and sometimes even star alignments. They believed these structures could conduct energy, create vibrational resonance, and even serve as portals between the physical and spiritual realms. This wasn't architecture. It was cosmic engineering. Hidden code in plain sight? Some researchers believe the pyramids and temples hold encoded measurements of the Earth itself. The Great Pyramid's height multiplied by 43,200 gives you the polar radius of Earth. The base perimeter multiplied by the same number? Boom, you get the Earth's equatorial circumference. That's either a wild coincidence or someone had access to planetary-scale data without satellites. And here's the kicker, that 43,200 number. It's based on the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year astronomical cycle the Egyptians somehow knew about. Ask NASA how long it took us to measure that. Brick by brick, code by code. They didn't build this stuff with vibes. They had specialized architect priests called master builders, trained in geometry, astronomy, spiritual alignment, and even sound resonance. Some chambers in the pyramids have acoustics that amplify frequencies like a tuning fork. Did the pyramids function like giant harmonic resonators? Some researchers think yes. Imagine the entire pyramid buzzing with vibrational energy, like a stone speaker tuned to the frequency of the universe. Modern science is just starting to explore that. The Egyptians, they were already doing it in 2500 BCE, and they did it in linen robes. So what were they really building? Here's the philosophical mic drop. Maybe the Great Pyramid wasn't just a tomb. Maybe it was a multi-dimensional message, part temple, part time capsule, part instruction manual for harmonizing human life with the cosmos. A structure so advanced, it survived 4,000 plus years, withstood earthquakes, shrugged off sandstorms, and still whispers secrets we haven't even translated yet. It's not just an old pile of rocks. It's a code written in stone, waiting for humanity to catch up. The next time someone tells you ancient people were primitive, remind them they were building structures so perfect, our best minds today still argue over how and why. Because when the blueprint is written in sacred geometry, the whole building becomes a cosmic symphony, and Egypt was the conductor. But while they were busy encoding math into the stone, they were also mastering something far stranger. A potion so powerful, it might have been ancient Egypt's version of an energy drink, or a divine hallucinogen. Fact 6 is not for the faint of mind. The mysterious blue lotus, Egypt's ancient elixir of the gods. All right, forget everything you know about herbal tea. Because the ancient Egyptians weren't sipping chamomile before bed. They were throwing back psychoactive petals like it was a Saturday night on the Nile. Enter the blue lotus, aka Nymphea cerulea, a sacred flower that was part divine symbol, part spiritual enhancer, and part low-key party favor. First off, what even is the blue lotus? Let's set the scene. This isn't just any pretty pond plant. The blue lotus was everywhere in Egyptian culture. Painted on tomb walls, carved into temples, worn in ceremonial garlands, offered to the gods. And often, yes, often, steeped in wine for religious rituals, and maybe a little recreational divine insight. The flower was so central to their worldview that it became a symbol of creation, rebirth, sun cycles, and altered states of consciousness, because unlike your average garden bloom, this baby had powers. Wine blue lotus, ancient Egyptian nightcap. Now, here's where things start glowing gold. The Egyptians infused blue lotus petals into wine, creating a kind of ceremonial cocktail that was asterisk rumored to induce mild euphoria, heightened awareness, vivid dreams, and even out-of-body experiences asterisk. And they didn't just sip it at dinner. They used it during funerals, spiritual festivals, and erotic poetry readings. Yes, you read that right. Erotic poetry. The blue lotus was associated with sexual vitality and pleasure, which explains why it's often shown held near the nose, or in scenes of feasting, lovemaking, or passing into the afterlife. It was basically the ancient Egyptian version of combining incense, red wine, and a little ayahuasca, but with better fashion. A natural psychoactive. Modern science actually backs this up. The blue lotus contains two compounds. Apomorphine, a dopamine agonist that can cause mild euphoria and dreamlike states. Nuciferine, a compound with calming, antispasmodic effects. So yeah, this wasn't just a pretty flower. It was mood-altering medicine, wrapped in petals and sacred meaning. No wonder the priests loved it. No wonder it shows up in rituals, seduction scenes, and afterlife prayers. And no wonder it became known as the flower of the sun god. Dream portals and divine messages. In some rituals, blue lotus wasn't even drunk. It was inhaled, soaked, or used in incense, meant to send you into a state where you could talk to the gods, travel in dreams, or even receive guidance from the spirit realm. Think of it like a built-in sleep app, with the spiritual upgrade fully unlocked. Ancient dream scrolls describe lotus-assisted dreams that were visions, not just REM sleep. Like, Ra appeared and gave me a message about the flood kind of dreams. They didn't think they were tripping. They thought they were tuning in. Sacred and scandalous? Now, here's the plot twist. While the priesthood used blue lotus for sacred rituals, it was also popular among elites, nobility, and partygoers. Yup, there are actual banquet scenes painted on tomb walls showing guests wearing blue lotus crowns, wine being poured over petals, and a general vibe that screams ancient Egyptian turnip. This wasn't just a drug. It was a multidimensional plant, a medicine for emotional healing, a bridge to the divine, a tool for spiritual exploration, and occasionally, the life of the party. Because who says enlightenment can't be fun? Legacy of the lotus. The blue lotus eventually faded from use as Egypt declined, but it never lost its reputation. Even today, it's sold as a natural supplement, smoked or steeped in herbal teas, studied for its dream-enhancing effects, and revered by spiritual seekers looking to tap into ancient plant wisdom. You can even find modern-day mystics calling it the gateway flower The Egyptians just called it sacred. Final thought. The Blue Lotus wasn't about getting high in the modern sense. It was about getting higher spiritually, emotionally, and maybe even dimensionally. Because for the Egyptians, enlightenment didn't come in the form of a sermon. It came as a flower. So the next time you see a lotus, remember, you're not just looking at a plant. You're staring into the nectar of the Nile's most powerful ritual elixir. And you thought your herbal tea was deep. Now, if you thought divine flowers and wine-soaked wisdom were impressive, wait until you hear what they were doing with electricity. Yes, electricity. Because I Will takes us underground, to temples where walls light up without torches and theories get shockingly weird. Let's go deeper. The Dendera light bulb. Did ancient Egyptians harness electricity? All right, time to flip the switch, literally. Because nestled deep within the temple of Hathor at Dendera, on the ceiling of a crypt never meant for public eyes, lies something so weird, so out of place, that it sparked decades of conspiracy, awe, and intellectual fistfights. A carving that looks suspiciously like a giant light bulb. Yes, a light bulb. In a temple that's over 2,000 years old. Let's talk about the Dendera light, and whether the Egyptians knew how to get lit. Without fire. First, the evidence. If you Google Dendera light, you'll see what appears to be a long, oval-shaped glass bulb with a thick serpent-like filament curling inside, a lotus flower base acting like a socket, and what many say looks like a power cable or insulator. There's even what resembles a coil-shaped object behind it, priests or technicians operating the device, and one dude just standing there like he's waiting for it to turn on. This isn't random graffiti. It's a detailed stone relief, precise, deliberate, and carved in one of the most sacred chambers of the temple. So, what the heck is it? The electric theory, some fringe theorists, and quite a few curious engineers, have put forward a wild idea. The Dendera relief shows a form of ancient electrical technology. Why? Well, let's break it down. No soot has ever been found on the ceilings of inner tombs or crypts, despite being completely dark, and sealed for centuries. No torches, no lamps, no traces of fire residue where light would have been needed for carving. The device in the carving looks eerily similar to a modern Crookes tube, a 19th century vacuum tube used in early experiments with electricity and cathode rays. Ancient batteries did exist. Remember the Baghdad battery? Clay jars with copper and iron rods inside, likely capable of generating small electric charges. So the theory goes, the Egyptians may have used basic electric lamps powered by chemical batteries. The serpent inside the bulb represents an energized filament or plasma arc. The lotus base is a symbolic plug. And the priestly figures were actually technicians or electricians managing divine technology. Far-fetched? Sure. But also not impossible. The mainstream counter-argument. Now let's bring in the skeptics, because they have thoughts. Most Egyptologists say, calm down, it's just symbolism. That's not a light bulb. That's a depiction of the Egyptian creation myth. They interpret the carving as, the lotus represents creation. The serpent is the god Harpsamtus, emerging from the lotus. The bulb shape? Just a stylized womb or solar bark. In other words, it's all spiritual metaphor, not science. But here's the kicker. Even if that interpretation holds up, it still doesn't explain the total absence of light source residue in tombs and chambers. No soot, no torch holders, no ventilation for flame, but carvings that go deep into the walls. So, how were they doing this? Alternative light sources? Some propose that Egyptians used highly polished bronze mirrors to reflect sunlight deep into tombs, or crystal lenses to focus beams. But there are two problems. Mirrors lose light intensity fast over long distances. Carvings go around corners, into areas even a bounce light system wouldn't reach. Which brings us back to that tantalizing possibility. Did the Egyptians really discover primitive electricity and then lose it? Or better yet, was it ever truly theirs? Or was it inherited from an even older, lost civilization? Cue the goosebumps. A civilization of secrets? Whether or not you believe in the Dendera light bulb theory, here's what we do know. The Egyptians were obsessed with light, both physical and spiritual. They encoded advanced knowledge into their art, astronomy, geometry, even acoustics. And their temples weren't just places of worship. They were machines of meaning, designed with purpose, proportion, and yes, possibly power. And if they did have access to a form of ancient lighting, whether technological or metaphysical, it changes everything we know about the past. It means our ancestors weren't just mystical. They were scientific in ways we're only now rediscovering. So, was it a light bulb? We'll probably never get a definitive answer. But here's the real point. The Dendera light carving isn't just about what was. It's about what might have been. And that's where the magic lives, in the possibility that ancient people weren't in the dark at all. They were just operating on a frequency we're only now tuning into. But while some were illuminating crypts with potential proto-electricity, others were busy documenting alien-like knowledge, in scrolls so advanced you'd think they were downloaded from another galaxy. Yes, we're talking star maps, flying discs, and forbidden blueprints hidden in temple texts. Buckle up, because this part is going interstellar. Did the ancient Egyptians carve helicopters and UFOs into stone? Let me paint the scene for you. A forgotten chamber, a flickering torch. A scholar gasps as their flashlight hits the ceiling of the Temple of Seti I at Abydos. There it is, carved into stone, a shape that looks unmistakably like a modern helicopter. Right next to it, something that resembles a submarine, a fighter jet, and even what could pass for a UFO saucer, all in a temple built over 3,000 years ago. Yeah, that happened. It's called the Abydos Helicopter Panel. And it has sent historians, conspiracy theorists, engineers, and armchair adventurers into meltdown ever since it was discovered. Coincidence? Or lost technology? Here's the weird part. These glyphs aren't subtle. We're not talking vaguely similar shapes, or stretch your imagination. We're talking dead ringer outlines that look like a Black Hawk military chopper, a modern blimp or drone, a stealth bomber silhouette. Even pilots and engineers who've seen the carvings say, "That's not birds, that's aviation, period." So, what gives? How did the Egyptians, with no known concept of flight, manage to etch aerial vehicles into stone, thousands of years before even Leonardo da Vinci thought about sketching wings? Well, we've got two competing theories. Mainstream explanation, the palimpsest effect. Egyptologists, the rational ones anyway, claim it's just a carving overlap, something called a palimpsest. Here's how that works. One pharaoh, likely Seti I, originally had a set of hieroglyphs carved. Years later, his successor, probably Ramesses II, wanted to make edits. Instead of smoothing the stone down, workers just chiseled new glyphs on top of the old ones. Result? A jumbled mash of symbols that accidentally looks like helicopters, tanks, and aircraft. Convenient. But let's be real. The odds of these random glyph overlaps producing recognizable outlines of future tech is, well, math isn't on that theory's side. It's like erasing 2 paragraphs of Shakespeare and accidentally creating the lyrics to a Taylor Swift song. Alternative theory. Ancient high-tech knowledge. Now, here's where things go zero gravity. Some researchers, engineers, and alternative historians argue these aren't accidents. They're intentional depictions of advanced aerial vehicles. Which begs a few heavy questions. Did the Egyptians inherit knowledge from a forgotten civilization? Were they in contact with otherworldly visitors? Or did they possess advanced technologies that were lost or buried after some massive catastrophe? It's not just about one temple either. Similar anomalies have been found in the Thule Papyrus, allegedly describing fiery flying discs in the sky, strange elongated skulls buried in royal tombs, and artifacts that appear to show winged craft, antennas, and pilots. Suddenly, the line between mythology and science fiction gets wobbly. More than just helicopters. Some of these carvings don't look just like tech. They resemble schematics. As if the carver wasn't just saying, "This flies," but "This is how it flies." And this opens up an even bolder theory. What if the knowledge wasn't alien, but ancient human, part of a long-lost global civilization with high-tech capabilities that crumbled in a cataclysmic event? A real-life Atlantis scenario. The Egyptians, then, wouldn't be inventors, but custodians of broken blueprints trying to preserve memory in stone. Carving what they could remember, what their ancestors had seen, and what they hoped would return. The mind-blowing possibility, even if you dismiss the UFO angle, even if you say it's all coincidence, one truth still lingers. Ancient Egypt was obsessed with the skies. Their entire religion, mythology, and science revolved around the stars, the heavens, and beings that came from above. Their gods flew in celestial boats. Their pharaohs ascended to join Ra in the stars. Their pyramids were aligned perfectly with Orion's belt, Sirius, and the cardinal directions. So maybe, just maybe, the helicopter carving isn't about flight. It's about remembering flight. Not because they had it, but because they lost it. And if that's true, then those stone etchings aren't mysteries. They're warnings. But hold on, before we launch full throttle into ancient aerospace, let's come back down to Earth, where the Egyptians were also making mind-bending advances in medicine. From brain surgery to contraceptives to fake limbs. Their hospitals were shockingly more advanced than you'd ever expect from a society that still worshipped cats. Brace yourself, this fact is about to get surgical. Egyptian medicine was shockingly advanced and kinda savage. Okay, let's set the mood. You've got a toothache. It's 1500 BC. You walk into what's basically an ancient urgent care clinic, except it's run by a scribe priest in a leopard skin robe, who doubles as your pharmacist, dentist, and surgeon. And guess what? You're in good hands. Because the Egyptians weren't just sticking leeches on people and praying to Anubis, these folks wrote down diagnoses, symptoms, surgical procedures, and even prescriptions, thousands of years before the Hippocratic Oath existed. They had medical textbooks. Enter the Ebers Papyrus, a 110-page medical scroll dated around 1550 BCE. This ancient document reads like a hybrid of WebMD, Gray's Anatomy, and a pharmaceutical brochure. It covers tumors, heart disease, digestive issues, mental health. Yes, they had a term for emotional burnout. And over 700 plus herbal remedies. They even identified diabetes through sweet-tasting urine. Yeah, taste testing was a thing. Brutal job. Oh, and the Edwin Smith Papyrus? That one outlines brain surgery, complete with descriptions of the meninges, brain lining, techniques to treat skull fractures, prognoses like, this one cannot be healed, which, to be fair, was just early malpractice coverage. They used natural antibiotics before antibiotics were a thing. The Egyptians were out here slathering wounds with moldy bread, not because they were gross, but because they somehow figured out that mold inhibits infection. Yes, that's essentially proto-penicillin. They also used honey as an antibacterial agent, willow bark to relieve pain, which contains salicin, the base for modern aspirin, garlic and onions to boost immunity, still valid, still smelly. They were like, this weird bread makes your leg not fall off? Noted. Science, but with divine flavor. Surgery? Oh, they went there. Let's talk operations. Archaeological evidence shows trepanation, cutting into the skull, was practiced. Limb amputations were performed. Surgical instruments like hooks, forceps, scalpels, and even cauterizing tools have been found. These weren't clumsy bone saw jobs. Some procedures show signs of clean, deliberate cuts and post-surgery healing, meaning the patients actually survived. They even developed prosthetic body parts, like the Greville Chester toe, an artificial wooden toe with a leather strap found on a mummy. Not just decorative, it helped the person walk. That's not a museum piece. That's prehistoric orthopedic design. Birth control fertility hacks. They had those too. Get this. The Egyptians didn't just know how to make babies. They knew how to stop them too. Their contraceptive recipes included crocodile dung mixed with honey and inserted vaginally. Gross but effective barrier method. Acacia gum, which has spermicidal properties. Cotton soaked in herbs as a primitive IUD. Sure, it's not exactly a Walgreens aisle, but it shows a deep understanding of reproductive science and herbology. And they even had pregnancy tests involving urinating on barley and wheat seeds. If the seeds sprouted, you were pregnant. If not, congrats, you could party at the Nile. Oddly enough, modern lab studies confirmed this method actually worked. "70% of the time. Not bad for people who thought the brain was just skull filler. Mind, body, spirit all connected. What's wild is how holistic Egyptian medicine was. They didn't separate science from spirituality. Their doctors were also priests, and healing included medical knowledge, spiritual rituals, magical incantations, which sounds weird until you remember. Today we blast ocean sounds and lavender oil during surgery. Same vibe. Their logic was, if the gods made your body, then treating the body honors the gods. Hence why temples were also hospitals. And your healing process might involve a salve and a prayer and a frog charm. Ancient multitasking. A legacy that echoes today. Greek medicine, heavily borrowed from Egypt. The father of Western medicine, Hippocrates, was trained in traditions that began in the Nile Valley. Even surgical tools, we still use scalpels, clamps, forceps mirror Egyptian designs. So the next time you pop an Advil or slap on a Band-Aid, remember, the blueprint may have started under a palm tree in Thebes. But while the Egyptians could heal the body, they were also obsessed with what came after death. And the real flex? They weren't afraid of dying. They spent their lives planning it. Up next, the obsession with the afterlife that led to one of the greatest pyramid-building projects the world has ever seen, and how death was just the beginning. Brace yourself. Next one is eternal. Death wasn't the end. It was the ultimate glow-up. Imagine this. You spend your entire life preparing for one thing. And no, it's not retirement. It's not a midlife crisis. Tesla. It's your death. Because in ancient Egypt, death wasn't a tragedy. It was an event. A launch. A transition into the greatest, most glamorous after-party of all time. And they weren't trying to sneak into the afterlife quietly. Oh no. They showed up with gold-lined sarcophagi, a boat for crossing spiritual rivers, jars full of their favorite organs, and sometimes a few unlucky servants. Talk about main character energy. They built skyscrapers for the dead. Let's talk about pyramids. You've probably seen them. You may have even visited one. But you probably haven't wrapped your head around what they really represent. The Great Pyramid of Giza, 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing 2 to 15 tons, stacked with such precision that modern engineers still argue about how it was done. This wasn't just a tomb. It was a monumental GPS signal to the gods. Why? Because the afterlife was a multi-step quest. And you'd better have the right tools, map, and backup plan if you wanted to reach the Field of Reeds, their version of paradise. The pyramid wasn't just a tomb. It was a launch pad. A cosmic elevator pointing straight to the Orion constellation, believed to be Osiris's celestial domain. And the alignment, astronomically perfect. Literally, they engineered immortality through architecture. The soul had a whole team. The Egyptian soul wasn't just one piece. Oh no, it was a complex ensemble cast featuring Ka, your life force, Ba, your personality, Think, your vibes, your swag, Ak, your transformed, luminous self in the afterlife, Shoot, your shadow, Ren, your name, which had magical power. To fully survive death, you had to preserve all these parts. That's why your name had to be spoken, your face painted on your coffin, your body mummified with meticulous detail, and your tomb loaded with offerings from food to furniture to weapons. Your body wasn't just buried. It was equipped for the journey. Mummification wasn't just dry wrapping. Let's get gross and genius. The process of mummification took 70 days, and it wasn't a quick wrap and roll. It was medical, spiritual, and theatrical. Organs removed with obsidian blades. Brain pulled out through the nose because they thought it wasn't important Big L there. Heart left in or replaced with a scarab amulet because it was the seat of judgment. Body packed with natron salts to dry it out like ancient beef jerky. Then oiled, perfumed, wrapped, and masked with gold. Every step was meant to protect the Ka and Ba so they could reunite in the afterlife. And once sealed, the tomb became a mini-universe. Food painted on walls could become real. Spells were inscribed to repel demons. and statues acted as substitutes if the body was damaged. They planned everything. Even their spiritual contingency plans had contingency plans. The final judgment was literally a heart check. You didn't just cruise into the afterlife. First, you stood in the hall of Ma'at, where your heart was weighed against a feather. Too heavy with guilt and sin. Your soul was gobbled up by Ammit, a terrifying croc-lion-hippo hybrid. But if you passed, welcome to eternal peace, a lush paradise where you farmed, drank beer, and chilled with the gods. So yeah, death was kind of a high-stakes interview. Except your resume was your entire life. The Book of the Dead was your cheat sheet. If you've ever crammed for an exam, the Egyptians would respect that hustle. They literally buried themselves with scrolls of spells, passwords, and divine cheat codes, aka the Book of the Dead. It included what to say to avoid getting eaten by demons, how to convince gods you were pure, instructions to resurrect, navigate, and thrive in the underworld. It was your afterlife walkthrough guide. Some people paid scribes to make deluxe, illustrated versions. Basically, print me a roadmap to heaven in gold ink, ASAP. Pets were welcome too. You thought you'd be lonely? Nah. Egyptians loved their pets, especially cats, who were seen as sacred protectors. Sometimes they were mummified alongside their owners. Others, left behind, but offered in statues or carvings, to join their humans later. And sometimes, even servants were buried with the elite, to continue serving them in the afterlife. Definitely not in the job description, but hey, divine HR was rough. Death was the beginning of forever. To the Egyptians, you only died if you were forgotten. So they built legacies of stone, scripture, sacred memory. Their monuments weren't just tributes, they were anchors, tying the soul to the world and launching it into the cosmos. And thousands of years later, it's still working. We're still saying their names, still studying their texts, still walking through tombs they built to last eternity. They nailed it. Conclusion: the afterlife was only the beginning. So here's the plot twist no one saw coming. The ancient Egyptians, they didn't live in fear of death. They mastered it. They designed entire civilizations around what comes next. Not with panic, but with precision, passion, and a little bit of obsession for gold, gods, and legacy. They weren't asking, what happens when I die? They were asking, how can I keep the party going for eternity? They saw death as the grand sequel, a continuation, not a finale. A VIP lounge in the cosmos, reserved for those who packed wisely, played the spiritual game right, and left their names etched in the walls of time. And here we are, thousands of years later, still uncovering their secrets, still reading their cheat codes, still whispering their names under moonlight. You want to talk about immortality? This is it. Legacy built from stone, soul, and story. Because while most of us are worried about how many likes we get before midnight, the Egyptians were like, make sure they remember me in 3,000 years. Pack your mind, not just your bags. If this story lit a torch in your brain, if you found yourself blinking in disbelief at the rituals, the brilliance, and the sheer audacity of a people who prepared to live forever, then you're already one of us. A seeker of strange truths, forgotten legends, and tales that hit harder than pyramid blocks. So here's what you do next. Tap that like button like it's your personal amulet. Subscribe to Guy on Bedtime Stories because we don't just tell stories, we resurrect them. We bring history's deepest mysteries to life with wit, wonder, and just the right sprinkle of dark, honeyed sarcasm. And hey, if the gods are watching, and they always are, you clicking subscribe might just be your ticket to the good afterlife. Drop a comment below too. What surprised you most about ancient Egyptian beliefs? Or better yet, what would you pack for your journey to the next world? From pyramids to papyrus, tombs to tales, this is Guy on Bedtime Stories, where ancient truths don't rest in peace. They rise every single night.